When patients are in the hospital, there's nobody more active in their healing process than nurses. In most scenarios, nurses are responsible for checking in with patients every hour to be sure they're doing okay and for ensuring a smooth transition to the next nursing team on duty. But all the scheduling, planning, tracking, and measuring is done manually today, increasing risks for patients of falls or neglect, and putting tremendous burden on nursing staff to keep up with everything that's happening in their ward. It should be no surprise that the innovation to change that was created by a couple of nurses who wanted to make things better for everyone. Hello and welcome to Data Points, the podcast that's all about how data and analytics are driving innovation in healthcare today. I'm your host, Greg Matthews, and our guest today is Paul Coyne, a doctor of nursing practice and the president of Inspiren, the world's first cognitive patient assistant. Paul's story is a remarkable one that you're going to want to hear directly from him, but I can tell you that he's had a pacemaker since he was 15, a stroke at 22, and been an investment banker while also getting his nursing degree, his MBA, serving in clinical nursing, and co-founding the company that's won innovation awards from the American Nursing Association, Fast Company, and South by Southwest Interactive. You're not going to want to miss this look at Inspiren, as seen through the eyes of its co-founder, Paul Coyne. Paul, thanks so much for being with us on Data Point today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've been really excited to talk to you ever since I became aware of Inspiren around the South by Southwest Interactive Innovation Competition this year, and am really eager to hear more about where you're going with Inspiren and some of the backstory as well. And I think maybe it would be good to start there if you don't mind. Can you give us a sense of how you came to co-found this really incredible, innovative company?
Yeah, I mean, how far back should we go? You want to go right after when
But from birth, I would say we've got all day.
Well, I guess I'll start post graduation from
fair
college,
enough.
and then quickly breeze through that, and then we'll get to the good stuff. But I graduated from Providence College in 2008, and right after I graduated college, I had a stroke and had to recover. While I was at Goldman Sachs, I had already had a job offer at Goldman Sachs, and so I just moved to New York and tried my best to make it through the difficult recovery and traded derivatives while I was doing it. So I did 3.5 years there while I recovered. I had difficulty speaking and walking, and ultimately regained my vocabulary and my memories, and really at that point came to a part of my life where I was trying to figure out if what to do next, and I wanted to, one, give purpose to what I went through, and two, prove to myself that my brain was back. And so I thought nursing was a good way to do that, and so I became a nurse. I went back to school and got a bachelor's and a master's and a doctorate from Columbia, and at the same time I got an MBA and a master's in finance from Northeastern, and really I couldn't do that now. My wife's expecting a baby in 5 weeks, and I wouldn't be able to. Congratulations! Go to. Thank you very much. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to go to all that school now. So I'm glad I did it. She wasn't around, and I was just recovering and wanted to really go for it. So I went to a lot of school, and then along the way met my wife at Columbia Nursing School. But I also met a wonderful friend and the founder of Inspiren, Mike Wang. And we were study partners, and my career moved me to an analytic role at New York Presbyterian Hospital, where I was responsible for some of the research requests and the data infrastructure, data warehousing, data visualizations, and really being the bridge between the clinical and the data folks to help them sort of translate some of the requests and help translate and create solutions for the hospital. And Mike moved to the bedside and was a clinical nurse at New York Presbyterian on the cardiac unit, and so he was out sick. He had hurt his knee, and he was out for a month. And when he was home, he was a little restless and had an idea to put a device on behind the bed that would initially we had some early ideas for it, but really one device that could do as much as possible. Just one device on the wall that would do as much as possible. And he called me up, and we had stayed friendly. This was about 3 or 4 years later, after we'd met at school, and he said, can you meet me? And I remember thinking, like, this is going to change my life if I go meet this guy, because he's got a lot more drive than me, and it really is a remarkable guy. But I thought, like, this will change my life. And so it did, and we met there, and he said, we're gonna do this and assemble a team, and I said, okay. So we did, and assembled a wonderful team, and over the last a couple of years, we've made some substantial progress to achieving the goal that we had set out for in Starbucks. But it's been a great journey. Yeah.
So, all right. Usually I don't do this, Paul, but your backstory raises about 1 million questions. I'm going to confine it to just a couple because I think they'll be relevant to take us where we want to go here. But
sure.
When you had a stroke, which obviously is a very unusual circumstance for somebody your age at the time, had you had a lot of prior experience with the healthcare system, or were you getting sort of a crash course in how health is delivered?
Yeah, so I was born with a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, so it's a disease where the wall between the ventricle is too thick, and that was what caused the stroke. So I've had a ICD, which is like the paddles that you see on television on the inside of your chest. It just kind of sits there and waits for something to go wrong with my heart, and then if it does, it shocks it. Luckily for me, I've had it for 17 years now, and it hasn't had to fire, but I've had multiple surgeries to change that out because the battery dies.
Got it.
So when I was 15, that was the first time that it went in, and there were some complications with that surgery that I was in the hospital at Boston Children's Hospital for a while, and then I was an EMT in college. So I had some experience both as a patient and as a provider, even prior to the stroke as an EMT and as a patient with a heart disease, and then the stroke and being a nurse kind of elevated both to the kind of, I guess, the next level of awareness for both patient and provider, if you will.
That is a really unique set of circumstances, and it actually leads to the second question I wanted to ask from a backstory perspective. When you decided that you did want to go back to school, why did you choose nursing? What was it about nursing that really appealed to you?
The nurse, in my opinion, I guess, but I think it's true. I don't think people would disagree. Is the role that's best suited to heal all aspects of the patient, both physical and emotional. And so much time, I think, as we look at those as two separate things. But I think they're the same thing. A sick person needs to be healed physically and emotionally. And the nurses were the individuals that helped me do that the best, that combination. And I thought being an awareness, me personally having an awareness of what it's like to be a patient, I wanted to be able to do that and understand both. And the nurse was the role that I think can really heal both aspects.
Fantastic. Okay, so now let's flash forward. You and Mike have come up with this idea, and you're thinking, you know what, I think we can do this. We're going to assemble a team. Tell me about sort of the process for creating V1 of Inspiren.
Yeah, so we the first thing we did was try to find someone that could help make it because we're not hardware experts.
Sure.
So we emailed everybody, and when I mean everybody, we emailed every PhD that we could find online and just said, hi, Paul and Mike. We were just firing emails every night to whoever would write back to us, and ultimately, with anything, ultimately someone writes back, and this individual wrote back, and we went down a path we had a few individuals write back, and we were going down multiple paths of development, and really we really had to sort of become not experts in the tech space, but experts in understanding the application of the various technologies of the individuals that we were speaking to realize to meet our need. And so we met with a few people who had different ways of doing it, and ultimately settled with 10x Beta, who's our development partner in the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Uh-huh.
It's a new lab in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and ultimately worked closely with them to create hardware that would solve it. And we had multiple iterations of trying to do the technology in a way that was conducive to our need, and ultimately created a hybrid fusion sensing platform with both Bluetooth and computer vision to monitor patients and any individual or medical equipment that's coming in and out of the room, to both assess what the individual is doing and the type of interaction that they're having, and also to monitor and be a data collection hub for medical equipment. And then the combination of those two things is where the real technological leap, I think, happened.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to meet that, we had to do a lot of stuff with computer vision that hasn't been done before, and the combination of the Bluetooth together really was instrumental. So the new lab connected us with John Gibbs, who's now our CTO, and MIT PhD, a brilliant man, and he's really responsible for most of the technological development that occurred.
So let's back up for a second, because I know in my intro I described briefly how Inspiren is being used or is envisioned to be used. Give the listeners a little bit more of a layman's view, if you can, of what it's intended to accomplish. You've hinted at it here, but how do you see, like, what was the need that drove this view around Inspiren? Can you help us understand that? And what are some of the?
So
we can get it. We're going to get into the details, but I'd love to hear sort of the high level story about it.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, Inspiren. Mike's a first-generation Chinese immigrant to the United States, and Ren means is the altruistic force that dwells within us all. So the name literally means to inspire Ren, or to inspire altruism. So this device is really meant to be a connector, not only of technology, but of human beings and the patient and the provider, and really to provide actionable data at the bedside, to know what's happening right now, and to give clinical staff and patients a connective way to sort of all be on the same page. So in a wide variety of ways, the most simple thing that it does is know who comes into the room and how long they stay. So it'll know that Paul came into the room, and it'll know Paul left the room. And with that very simple data timestamp, we're able to create a game for nurses that shows, which nurse spent the most time with patients, and which nurse answers the call bells the fastest. So to really gamify the system, so that nurses are rewarded for the great work that they're doing, and that it's visible. Because another thing that it does, just with that simple data element, is the practice of hourly rounding. So that's the practice of checking on a patient every hour. And in a hospital, if you have 9 or 10 patients, or 5, even if you just have 3, it's difficult to remember really what was the precise last time that I checked on that patient. So this device will just light up orange after it's been an hour to let you know, hey, it's been an hour since someone saw this patient, and then anyone can go and check on the patient. It could be a nurse or a PCA. It creates a team atmosphere, and then we're rewarding the individuals that helped out their teammate. So it's just promoting a culture of cohesiveness. And then another thing that it does is lets the patient know, everyone that checked on them. So, I mean, me having a stroke, it's difficult. Physical therapy comes to the room, and the nurse comes to the room, and you're like, who are all these people, And it's as a patient, it's challenging, but this just keeps a log of, these are all the people that came and saw you. So though that's at its basic premise, it really is just to, hourly rounding, bedside reporting is another nurse thing. These two things have been shown to improve HCAP scores and press gaining data, but to actually have it in real time and to reward people for doing it is kind of it just hasn't been done this way. So bedside reporting is the practice of checking on 2 nurses at shift handoff. They both will say, hey, I'm Paul, I'm your new nurse, and Mike's going to be going home, and then Mike says Paul's a great guy, and the patient feels like and knows that people care about them together at the bedside. So this very intelligently knows that both of them are there. It'll light up a different color after a designated period of time, say 10 seconds goes by, to let you know that the bedside report has been done, and then then that's it. And then on the patient, it'll say these two nurses came and saw you at this time. And so it's so just on those two simple things, I think that's where it started. It's evolved now to be able to know when a patient is turned. For example, a pressure ulcer is a big problem, and currently in the medical chart, it'll say that a patient needs to be turned every 2 hours.
We are getting into the real nitty-gritty here.
Yeah.
We do need to take a really quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a lot more about the kind of sensing that Inspiren does and how it interacts with the rest of that data. So stick around, folks. We're going to be right back with Paul Coyne on Data Point.
Today's show is brought to you by Spire, a full-service digital marketing agency focused on complex and highly regulated industries of healthcare, senior living, and financial services. Rapid changes in the healthcare industry are causing consumers to seek out trusted advice, demand more transparency and access to information and content. With over 30 years of healthcare experience, Spire knows how to help you reach, communicate with, and gain trust from these consumers. We help you engage with the right content at every touch point, from the first symptom search to appointment scheduling through care management. Visit us at bluespiremarketing.com to learn how we can help you deliver relevant, engaging content through ever-changing touch points that matter.
All right, we are back on Data Point. I'm your host, Greg Matthews, and we're here today with Paul Coyne, the president and co-founder of Inspiren. Paul, when we went to the break, you were just getting into something that I think is really critical to understand about Inspiren. We get that patients, have lots of sensors that are attached to them while they're in their hospital room, and they're collecting data that's being aggregated. You talked about how Inspiren has enabled us to see who's coming in and out of the room and at what times and in what combinations. All of that makes sense. But you were just beginning to allude to some other kinds of sensor behavior that Inspiren does. Can you talk a little bit about other kinds of, awareness that Inspiren is able to notice and catalog?
Absolutely. So with the thermal vision, and again, the way we designed it is patient. It's sort of patient agnostic. So we know that there's individuals in the room. The way that we identify staff can potentially be by themselves. With their identity of Mike or Paul.
Mm-hmm.
But for a patient, we basically know if they're there or not, and that's how we design the system deliberately to not be able to. We can mirror that with other data that has identifiers of the EMR, really, of who that person is. But for us, we just know their computer vision outlay, and so we're able to do some things that other people can't the way that we're doing it, and one of them is turn-in positioning of a reducer in pressure ulcers. Mm-hmm. And what that means is a patient lays in a bed for a while when they're in the hospital. Some are ambulatory, some are confined to the bed. And in current practice, a provider or a physician will say this patient needs to be turned every, say, 2 hours is normally the standard. They'll turn the patient to the left, they'll turn them to the right, put pillows under them so that the pressure is not applied to the same place of the body so that a pressure ulcer doesn't develop. Mm. And so these are very costly, and they've reduced. I mean, they're paying. It's a problem, and it's a preventable thing. If turned, they wouldn't happen. But currently, it requires an order. A turn-in position order. Someone needs to say, hey, I think this person needs to be turned. And then it requires someone to turn them every 2 hours. And the way that that's done is in the medical record. It could be all done, in a hallway, right?
Yes.
And so this device, still on the wall, knows if this patient has spent too much, hasn't moved. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to explore the technology to alert providers and say, hey, this patient hasn't moved in 2 hours. They haven't shifted their body weight and their body position. So let's turn them, which is a far more accurate way of doing it than, saying, oh, has the 2 hours passed? Did they really need an order? It's just like kind of everyone does. If you haven't moved in 2 hours,
sure,
we go turn you. So that's one of the ways. Another way that we're doing it is for fall prevention. So there's bed alarms, and sometimes there's even one-to-ones that require an individual to go in and sit and watch a patient in the room because they're at risk of getting up out of the room. And a lot of time and resources and financial resources are spent, on these kinds of things. This device, same one on the wall, would just say, this patient's getting out of bed. So, go get him.
Yes.
But at the same time, that same data capture can also be used to say, well, this patient is getting out of bed, so therefore they're not at risk for a pressure ulcer. So it's the same data point, and we're just applying it in different clinical scenarios.
So I would imagine that there are other ways that patients' patterns of movement could be useful, especially when compared with other biometric data. Perhaps to determine, is somebody over or under medicated, for example? Is the quality of their sleep good or bad? Are any of those kind of things, possible today, or potential for the future?
Yeah, potential for the future, particularly sleep, as you had mentioned. So yeah, definitely, that's an area that we're taking the technology. We have sort of three ways that we're developing the technology. The first is with the hardware itself to be able to do more in terms of computer vision and some of the technology that's behind the hood of the device. The second is on the software development of the actual mobile applications that we've developed to deliver the information to the patient. And then the third is the analytics, both that feed the app, but also do what you just stated, which is to make sense of the computer vision in a way that is applicable to new use cases.
And I would imagine that with what you described about the relative anonymity of the patient to the Inspiren system, some of those things would have to be done retroactively, right? To sort of match the timestamps between a heart monitor and the patterns of movement and that kind of thing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the anonymity is really up to the hospital. I mean, if we want to create, it's just where the data goes. If it feeds to a data warehouse where some of that other data is, it can very easily be joined.
We could probably do this for 3 hours and not get nearly enough, but I'm not going to do that to you or anybody else today. Yeah, exactly.
I hope they feel the same.
They're going to be begging for more.
Okay.
So I do want to ask about where you are in this process. Tell me about, you talked about assembling the team. You mentioned that you had pulled John Gips from MIT. What else does your team look like? How big are you? How are you made up?
Yeah, so we're starting to bring more in-house now. We had worked with a wonderful development partner to develop some of the software. Normative, a Canadian company, to develop a lot of the mobile applications in the software. Our internal team currently was made up of Vin, he's a COO, wonderful software implementation expert and project manager that worked for a few years at Accenture and then moved to Viva, and then now with us. He was actually my roommate for the first 5 years when I recovered from a stroke. So
how about that?
He's helped me wonderfully both recover from a stroke and start a company. So I owe him an awful lot.
Amazing.
So he's really leading the operations of the company, the day-to-day, getting the insurance and everything that it takes to run a company. And then Jeff Morelli, who was my roommate after Vin moved in with his now wife. Jeff was my second roommate. Also, was Vin's friend from Accenture, and ended up being my roommate, and now a brilliant analytics expert and also software implementation. So the two of them are really leading a lot of the boots on the ground and the real day-to-day operations. And then Mike, clearly the visionary, who thought of this entire thing and really leads the company. And then we just hired an individual, Rahul Rana, who's a computer vision expert, master's degree, and young guy, but just brilliant in terms of his computer vision skills. So that's sort of the core. And Sabrina Butcher is our director of clinical implementation. She's a nurse. She's been with us from the beginning, and she was actually Mike's charge nurse.
Wow.
He brought her on to lead a lot of the clinical the way that the nurse and the clinical charge nurse, a lot of the development of how this actually works on the floor is her. So well, that's our core team, and then we have a lot of vendors that work with us for
right.
everything else, So.
And I guess if the pattern holds, your wife should be taking a key role with the company soon, because I'm guessing she's your current roommate.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. No, she'll say absolutely not. But she's more than capable. She's the reason for it all.
So it sounds like a really exciting time for you as you're beginning to bring some of these things in-house and bring these different types of expertise together. Tell me about where you are in terms of the product itself. How is this being used in real life? How is it being used? How do you see that usage growing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so we're piloting at a major academic medical center in New York City. We're in about 40 beds right now in that hospital. We're signing contracts currently for expansion to 2 more hospitals, and we're working to do novel research on this. So I mean, this kind of data hasn't ever been really available before. And so Columbia Nursing is really conducting, Dr. Carolyn Sun at Columbia Nursing is really spearheading the research efforts there to drive a lot of what is applied to the research arm of, is this the impact of this on falls, the impact of it on pressure ulcers, the impact of it on patient satisfaction and nurse satisfaction, nurse retention, all of these things that we know will be improved as a result of this because it's been proven before. It's just hourly rounding. It used to require an individual to walk around with a clipboard and kind of see who, but now this data is just readily available without, substantial investment in researchers. So it's been proven to work. It just hasn't been this readily available. And so we're going to continue to conduct the research, get into more hospitals. Nursing homes is another wonderful place where the technology can be applied. And we'll just continue to enhance our technology team to continue to do, more remarkable things with the computer vision, and hopefully just make more of an impact and save some more lives. I always think about, people ask why I did this, and my mom, stayed in the hospital every night. She's never missed a night. If I'm in the hospital now, she'll drive down from Boston, and I've probably spent 50 or 60 nights in the hospital, and my mom's never missed one in the chair next to me. And a lot of people don't have that,
Right.
And so this technology, is a it's not nothing's as good as my mom, right? But this is about as close as you can. We're trying to make something that this is as close as you can get to creating an environment that feels that way, both emotionally and tech, and both emotionally and from the tech perspective of having someone that knows that you're there, but really because it's bringing other human beings and creating this environment and we call it in the device for interaction, in for insight, but mainly in for interaction because we're trying to promote real interaction, genuine, authentic interaction between care teams and patients to create a better healing environment.
So I want to close here, and we just have a few minutes left, but we've revolved several times back to the subject of nurse, and you talked about the nurse as healer, right? The person who is most able to impact the healing of a patient physically and emotionally. This also touches on a theme around nurse as innovator, and that is a theme that I think is probably less well understood. Can you tell me about some of the work that you are doing and are doing in concert with others to enhance and help to raise awareness around that role of nurse as innovator?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think this is, nurses are the most trusted profession year after year in every poll, and caring are words that are used to describe this profession a lot, my profession. But innovator, it wasn't really at the top, though it should have been, because Florence Nightingale innovated the profession out of the need in the modern age, and she was an innovator. That's why the nurses exist. So from then, every shift, a nurse has to innovate, whether that's figuring out a better way to tie the IV tubes, or use a product differently. So the nurses are innovating all the time. It's just I don't know if everyone sees themselves that way as a nurse, but they should. So there's a movement, I think, happening where nurses' knowledge and innovative spirit, and really their drive and incentive to to care for the patient is really where all innovation should come from. And so based on their knowledge, their innovative spirit, and that intent really makes a nurse, there's no better person to innovate than a nurse. And so we are trying, our best, Mike and I and Inspiren and everyone at Inspiren. Mike and I just co-authored a book called The Nurse's Guide to Innovation with some other nurse leaders in the United States. Rebecca Love, who was the first nurse ever featured on TED, is a co-author. Bonnie Clipper, the former vice president of innovation at the American Nurses Association, is co-author. So that book is coming out in August, and really hoping that this movement sort of catches on, because when unleashed, the power of nurse innovation, I think, will really have great impact on patient care and really everyone. We're all going to be patients. We're all patients, So just on all of us in the healthcare system as a whole, I think it'll have great impact. And Rebecca Love and some others co-founded this group called SONCL, which is a society for nurse innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership, to really sort of some of these themes that I just talked about, really collect people that are passionate about this together and really drive it forward. So there's a lot of great work coming out of that as well. And even some of the larger companies, Johnson & Johnson has pitch events now, and a lot of some of the other companies are really starting to tap into this potential. So it's great to see, and I hope that there's nothing that we always say that there's nothing that we did at Inspiren that was revolutionary. The technology is, but us as human beings are. Anyone really, if you put your mind to it, I think any nurse could really follow this way. So we're just trying to show everyone that it's possible, and that great with a great team. I don't know if I certainly couldn't do anything alone, but with a great team of people that care about each other and are trying to do the right thing. Particularly nurses, I think, can do whatever they set their mind to with regard to innovation.
I think that is fantastic, and it's a great way to close us out. I have a feeling it's not going to be the last we're hearing about nurse as innovator here on the Data Point podcast. Of course, Bonnie Clipper was one of the very first guests that we ever had on the show, and still a good friend. And so we are going to keep our eyes open for the book as it comes out in August. And in the show notes for this podcast, I'm going to include links for SONCL, which is the organization of nurses that Paul referenced, as well as your website, Paul, Inspiren, which is INSPIREN.com. Hopefully I got that right. I will also post links to social media so that people can begin to connect with you. Paul, I can't thank you enough for being with us today, for sharing your experience, and I know we're going to want to stay in tune in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Data Point podcast. If you like what you've heard, please do rate, review, and share it with your social network. It means a lot. And if you have ideas for show topics or guests, please email them to me at greg@healthquant.health, or send a direct message to @ChiMoose on Twitter. That's CHIMOOSE on Twitter. For more information about this show or any of the terrific healthcare podcasts in the Touchpoint Media Network, check them out at touchpoint.health. See you next time.
This has been a Touchpoint Media production. To learn more about this show and others like it, please visit us online at touchpoint.health.